20% alternative assets, really inspired by what we're hearing from the Fed as far as what they intend to maintain in the digital asset stockpile, which is Ethereum, Solana, ADA, XRP. And then we also have the ability to...
We need to talk about why Tier 1 banks are quietly positioning around XRP and HBAR for the 2026 bull run. Here's the strange part. This move isn't loud. There are no fireworks, no viral headlines screaming by now. In fact, most people will scroll past this entire shift without noticing anything at all. And that's exactly how institutional positioning always begins.
If done right, the X would serve people's financial needs to such a degree that over time it would become, I don't know, maybe half of the global financial system. Wow. Or some big number. I'm not sure what the number is, but pretty big. So it would be by far the biggest sort of financial institution. But like I said, not really in the way that people are used to thinking about banks. Mm-hmm. Just the most efficient.
Tier 1 banks do not chase narratives. They don't speculate on vibes. They don't gamble on memes. These are entities that move trillions, not thousands. They care about infrastructure, settlement certainty, regulatory alignment, and operational efficiency. And when they start circling specific digital assets, it's not because of price. It's because of function. XRP and Hedera HBAR sit in a very uncomfortable category for the average retail trader. They're not exciting in the traditional crypto sense. They don't promise overnight miracles. They don't market themselves with rebellion or chaos. Instead, they talk about things like liquidity corridors, message consensus, finality, throughput, compliance, and governance. Boring words. Dangerous words. Because boring is where the real money hides. Tier 1 banks are preparing for a financial system that does not look like the one we grew up with. Cross-border payments are too slow. Settlement takes too long. Capital is trapped in pre-funding systems that waste billions every single year. The old rails are cracking, and the institutions that sit at the top of the food chain know it. They're not waiting for permission from social media. They're building exits and upgrades now. XRP was designed for one thing and one thing only: moving value efficiently at scale. Not as a theory, not as a promise, as a working system. Liquidity on demand removes the need for banks to park money all over the world just to facilitate transfers. That single change alone rewires how global finance operates. Tier 1 banks understand this because they feel the pain every day. Retail users don't. Banks do. HBAR enters the picture from a different angle, and this is where most people miss the plot. Hedera is not competing for attention. It's competing for trust. Its governance model, made up of some of the most powerful corporations on Earth, is not an accident. It's a signal. Banks don't want networks that can be hijacked by anonymous whales or sudden rule changes. They want predictability. They want security. They want systems that won't collapse because of online drama. Hedera's hashgraph technology offers high throughput, low latency, and finality that financial institutions require. But more importantly, it offers something crypto rarely talks about honestly: control with transparency. That balance is exactly what regulated entities need. Total chaos doesn't scale. Structured decentralization does. Now here's where the 2026 narrative starts to take shape. Banks are not reacting to price cycles. They're reacting to regulatory clarity, tokenization frameworks, and settlement modernization. Tokenized assets, real-world value moving on-chain, and interoperable systems are no longer experimental ideas. They are active projects. And XRP and HBAR are positioned at the rails level, not the application layer. Most retail investors spend their time chasing what might pump next. Institutions spend their time asking what must exist for the next system to function at all. That's a very different mindset. When you adopt it, your entire perspective changes. You stop asking when moon. You start asking who needs this to work. Tier 1 banks don't need 10,000 tokens. They need a few that can handle massive volume, strict compliance, and global scale. That list is very short. XRP keeps appearing on it. HBAR keeps appearing on it. Not because of YouTube thumbnails. Because of architecture. The reason this matters now is because infrastructure is built before demand becomes visible. By the time the public sees clear confirmation, the positioning is already done. Liquidity routes are tested. Systems are integrated. Partnerships are finalized quietly. Then one day, price moves violently, and everyone asks what happened overnight. Nothing happened overnight. Everything happened slowly, then all at once. 2026 is not being prepared for in public spaces. It's being prepared for in boardrooms, regulatory meetings, pilot programs, and sandbox environments. That's where XRP and HBAR live. That's why they frustrate impatient investors. And that's why they attract institutions. If you're feeling uneasy right now, that's normal. This kind of shift doesn't feel exciting. Feels uncertain. Feels quiet. Feels like you might be early or wrong. But every major financial transition in history felt exactly like this before it became obvious. So the real question isn't whether Tier 1 banks are picking XRP and HBAR. The real question is this: what does it mean if the most powerful financial institutions on the planet are aligning themselves with infrastructure you can still access today? Because once the system flips, access is the first thing that disappears. I want you to sit with something for a second. Not the charts, not the price, but the silence. Because while retail is arguing online about whether XRP or HBAR is dead, Tier 1 banks are doing what they always do in moments like this. They're preparing quietly. And preparation does not look like announcements. It looks like pilots, sandboxes, internal memos, regulatory conversations, infrastructure testing, the kind of boring, invisible work that never trends on social media but ends up reshaping entire systems. This is where Section 2 really matters, because this is where the deception happens. Not deception in a malicious way. Deception through misunderstanding. Most people think banks move after price confirms. That is completely backwards. Banks move before price because price is the byproduct of utility at scale. They don't buy hype. They buy inevitability. Let's talk about what Tier 1 banks actually care about, because this clears up everything. They care about settlement finality, meaning when a transaction is done, it is done. No rollbacks, no uncertainty, no waiting hours or days to know if money truly moved. In traditional finance, this is a nightmare problem. Transactions bounce between intermediaries, reconciliation takes time, and capital is locked up in limbo. That inefficiency costs billions every single year. XRP directly attacks that problem. Not theoretically, practically. Its entire reason for existing is to act as a bridge asset that allows value to move instantly between different currencies and systems without the need for pre-funded accounts. For a global bank, that is not a feature. That is a structural upgrade. Now zoom out. Tier 1 banks also care about compliance. This is where many crypto narratives fall apart. Banks do not want systems that fight regulation. They want systems that can live inside it. That doesn't mean centralized control in the way crypto maximalists fear. It means predictability, auditability, and governance. This is where Hedera enters the picture in a way most people still do not understand. HBAR is not trying to replace banks. It is trying to become the ledger banks can actually use. Its governance model, which people love to criticize, is precisely why institutions pay attention. Known governors, clear rules, long-term stability, no anonymous group that can fork the network on a whim. That scares retail traders because it feels less rebellious. Comforts banks because it feels usable. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The future financial system will not be built on rebellion. It will be built on cooperation between legacy institutions and new rails. That's not an opinion. That's how every major technological shift in finance has ever happened. Another thing banks care deeply about is throughput at scale. It's one thing to process a few thousand transactions during a bull run. It's another thing entirely to handle enterprise-level volume every second of every day without failure. Hedera's architecture was built with this exact requirement in mind. Speed, low cost, and consistency. Not during hype, during normal operation. Now combine XRP and HBAR in the same mental frame. XRP specializes in moving value across systems. HBAR specializes in recording, coordinating, and validating activity at enterprise scale. That combination is not accidental. It's complementary. Tier 1 banks don't ask, which coin will pump the hardest. They ask which stack can survive stress, regulation, and global usage without breaking. When you see repeated institutional interest around these names, it's because they answer questions most tokens never even considered. Another critical piece most retail investors miss is timing. Banks do not move when things feel safe. They move when frameworks are forming. Tokenization pilots, digital asset custody rules, on-chain settlement trials. These things start years before the public narrative catches up. By the time the average investor feels confident, the risk-reward is already skewed. 2026 is not about a random bull run. It's about convergence. Regulation meeting infrastructure. Traditional finance meeting blockchain rails. Real-world assets moving on-chain. This is the environment where XRP and HBAR make sense, not as speculative bets but as system components. And here's where the emotional tension comes in. Holding assets like these feels boring, feels slow, feels like nothing is happening. And that psychological discomfort is what shakes most people out before the real move begins. Institutions do not feel this discomfort. They operate on decades, not dopamine. If you're still measuring progress by daily candles, this entire shift will feel invisible to you. But if you start measuring progress by integration, alignment, and necessity, the picture changes completely. Ask yourself this instead of asking about price. What happens if global settlement speeds matter more than narratives? What happens if compliance becomes a feature, not a weakness? What happens if the next financial system prioritizes reliability over excitement? Those questions lead you directly back to why Tier 1 banks keep circling XRP and HBAR. Not loudly, not emotionally, but methodically. And the scariest part for most people is this. By the time banks openly confirm their positions, the opportunity window you had as a retail participant is already gone. That's the real divide in crypto. Not between projects, between mindsets, those who wait for permission, and those who recognize preparation when they see it. This is where the real separation happens between people who consume crypto content and people who position for structural change. So let's talk about what almost nobody wants to talk about honestly. The psychological trap. Most XRP and HBR holders are not wrong. They're just early. And in markets, early often feels identical to wrong until the very last moment. Think about how strange this cycle has been. Every time excitement starts to build, price stalls. Every time retail confidence grows, momentum fades. That's not accidental. That's what accumulation phases look like when institutions are involved. Slow, frustrating, emotionally exhausting, designed to test conviction rather than reward impatience. Institutions don't need price to move fast. They need it to stay accessible long enough to build around it. This is where the deception of price becomes dangerous. Price is the loudest signal, but it's also the least informative when infrastructure is being built. During these phases, price is intentionally suppressed by uncertainty, doubt, regulatory fear, and narrative confusion. Not through conspiracy, but through absence of clarity. Markets hate ambiguity. Institutions thrive in it. Retail investors are wired for resolution. We want confirmation. We want a green candle that tells us we were right. Institutions are wired for optionality. They want exposure before confirmation, when risk feels highest and confidence feels lowest. That's why XRP and HBR feel heavy right now. They are not story coins. They are system coins. And system coins do not move until the system demands them. Here's something few people are prepared to accept. When utility finally activates at scale, price does not rise politely. It reprices violently, not gradually, not with warnings, with gaps, with disbelief, with regret flooding timelines full of people saying, "I sold too early." We've seen this pattern before in other markets. Infrastructure assets remain ignored until usage becomes unavoidable. Then suddenly everyone wants exposure at once. Liquidity dries up, volatility explodes, and the narrative flips from skepticism to inevitability in weeks. This is why timing the exact moment is nearly impossible. But positioning beforehand is very possible. Now let's talk about why XRP and HBAR specifically create this psychological pressure. They are associated with institutions people don't trust. Banks, corporations, regulators. That alone makes them emotionally difficult to hold in a space that was born out of anti-system ideals. Many investors feel like holding these assets means betraying the original spirit of crypto. But markets don't reward ideology. They reward alignment with reality. And reality is this: global finance is not being torn down. It's being upgraded. That upgrade requires rails that can handle scale, compliance, and coordination. XRP and HBAR are built for that world, not for narrative purity. And that makes them uncomfortable, because they don't give you a tribe to hide in. They force you to think independently. Another reason Section 3 matters is because this is where impatience becomes expensive. Many holders say they believe in 2026, but they behave like traders stuck in 24-hour cycles. Every dip feels personal. Every delay feels like betrayal. And slowly, quietly, conviction erodes. Institutions count on this. Not maliciously, structurally. Weak hands transfer assets to strong hands during periods of boredom, not panic. This is how accumulation really happens. Not during crashes, but during long stretches where nothing exciting seems to occur. Ask yourself this honestly. If XRP and HBAR truly had no future role, would institutions still be testing, integrating, and referencing similar architectures across global finance? Or would these assets have already faded into irrelevance? Markets have a way of killing useless things quickly. What lingers is usually unresolved, not dead. Now let's address the fear that nobody wants to say out loud. What if you're wrong? That fear is healthy. Blind faith is dangerous. But there's a difference between uncertainty and ignorance. If your conviction is based on understanding infrastructure trends, regulatory direction, and institutional behavior, then doubt becomes a tool, not a weakness. The mistake is outsourcing conviction to price action alone. Price is a lagging indicator in system transitions. By the time price confirms, positioning is over. This is why most people will only believe XRP and HBAR are real after they become expensive. And then they will say they always believed, while wishing they had acted when belief felt hardest. Section 3 is about recognizing that this phase is not meant to feel good. It's meant to filter. Filter out those who need constant excitement. Filter out those who require external validation. Filter out those who confuse noise for progress. What remains are people who understand that markets move in layers. Narrative first, infrastructure second, price last. We are between narrative and infrastructure completion. That is the most uncomfortable place to be. But it is also the most asymmetric. Because once infrastructure flips into visible usage, there is no rewind button. There is no second chance accumulation phase. There is only repricing and regret. This is why institutions stay quiet. Loud money attracts competition. Quiet money builds advantage. If you're still here mentally, still paying attention, still questioning but not panicking, that tells you something about yourself. You're not chasing certainty. You're tolerating ambiguity. And that is the single most valuable skill in markets like this. This isn't about convincing you to believe harder. It's about helping you understand why this feels so difficult, and why that difficulty itself is part of the signal. The market is not asking you to predict the future. It's asking whether you can sit through the silence long enough to let the future arrive. If you've made it this far, you already feel it. That quiet tension between what the market is showing you and what your instincts are starting to understand. This is the moment most people never reach, because it requires sitting with uncertainty instead of running from it. Here's the truth most channels won't say out loud. XRP and HBAR are not designed to make you feel smart in the short term. They are designed to make systems work in the long term. And those two things almost never overlap at the same time. When people talk about 2026 as if it's some magical date, they miss the point. It's not about a calendar flip. It's about a transition completing. Regulation aligning with infrastructure. Institutions finishing their testing phases. Tokenization moving from pilot programs into live environments. Settlement systems demanding rails that don't break under pressure. That transition does not announce itself with a countdown. It reveals itself through behavior. Banks building quietly. Corporations governing networks instead of speculating on them. Developers prioritizing reliability over virality. That's the behavior you're seeing around XRP and HBAR right now. And here's the uncomfortable part. The market is offering you a choice before it offers you confirmation. You can wait until everything makes sense, until price moves, until the headlines shift, until your fear disappears. Or you can recognize that fear is present precisely because clarity hasn't arrived yet. Every major reprice in financial history punished those who needed certainty first. The people who benefit are not the loudest. They're not the most confident. They're the ones who understood the direction of change before it became obvious. This is why so many will say, I knew about XRP or I heard about HBR years ago, after the fact. Awareness is not positioning. Conviction is not holding through comfort. It's holding through boredom, doubt, and silence. If XRP becomes a core liquidity rail, it will not move politely. If HBAR becomes a trusted enterprise ledger, it will not ask for permission from retail narratives. These assets will not rise because people suddenly believe harder. They will rise because systems begin to rely on them. And when reliance replaces speculation, price is forced to catch up. This is why this phase feels heavy. You're not early to a trend. You're early to infrastructure. And infrastructure investing is lonely by design. But lonely doesn't mean wrong. It means you're standing in the space between disbelief and inevitability. So here's the question I want you to sit with honestly. If nothing changes tomorrow, can you still hold your thesis? If noise increases, can you ignore it? If excitement shifts elsewhere, can you stay focused on what actually matters? Because that's the difference between watching a cycle and participating in it. If this perspective grounded you instead of hyped you, subscribe for clarity over chaos. Like the video if you're building conviction, not chasing candles. And comment still here if you're willing to sit through the silence while others look away.